Have you ever heard of Anthony Arkwright? No, me neither. Most people haven't. Yet his crimes were among the most shocking that Britain has ever seen. They were calculated, they were brutal, they were committed with deliberate cruelty. But Arkwright, he didn't just kill. He performed. He staged grotesque crime scenes. He boasted about his murders in pubs. He taunted the police with playing cards. It was as if it was all just a twisted game to him. Such remorsefulness demanded the absolute harshest of penalties, and the justice system responded by giving him a whole life tariff. And that's a punishment that's reserved for the most despicable of prisoners. And that ensures that Arkwright, he is never going to walk free again, which is marvellous. But Arkwright, despite all his best efforts to secure infamy, he is barely remembered. This is a man that wanted to carve his name into history, but instead, history erased him. Hello, welcome to my true criminal abode. As ever, you are very, very welcome. Before I tell you about today's despicable human being, I need to give you my usual trigger warning. You are watching true crime, so I assume, obviously, you're going to be somewhat prepared. But just in case there is murder, there is some reference to CSA. So please, as ever, as you know, mental health is an absolute biggie for me. So I really do mean it when I say look after yourself. So without further ado, I'm being theatrical because I'm mocking this man who craved notoriety, who only gave a damn about putting on a show. So let's get on with the case of Anthony Arkwright, the killer who craved infamy, but nobody knows his name. So Anthony Arkwright, he was born in 1967 to parents Zoe and Dick. He was the middle child of 5 siblings, and he was raised in the working class mining town of Wath upon Dearne, which is in Yorkshire in the north of England. When Arkwright was 4 years old, his mother divorced his father and left the family, abandoning her children to their father's care. Now, we don't know the reason for this. The way that sources phrase it is that she abandoned him. But, you know, it could be for a good reason. We don't know what the reason is. Either way, as we know, children who feel as if they're abandoned early on by their parents or one parent, they can grow up to have issues, as we know. Now, Dick, he worked long hours. He was a miner, so he didn't really have the time, and from the way that sources phrase it, nor the inclination to look after his children either. And we know this because Arkwright grew up in children's homes, growing up in this world of instability and neglect. As a result, Arkwright's chaotic upbringing bred this deep-seated anger and resentment that kind of shaped him into being this disturbed individual that he would later become. Now, on top of the feelings of abandonment, there were these rumours going around, they were circulating, that he was born in an incestuous relationship between his mother and his grandfather. Now, these were whispers that they fueled this growing alienation in him. Now, later on, his mother Zoe, she did dispute these claims. But either way, growing up with this belief that you are created from an incestuous relationship, so you don't even know if your father's your father, you think that your grandfather might be your father. obviously it just contributed to this warped sense of identity. It's going to shape the person that he became because he's going to have this resentment. And second of all the sources seem to say that there were these rumours about the relationship between his mother and his grandfather. Well, I just want to point out, if true, which it looks like it might have been true, that's not a relationship, that's abuse. Just saying. Anyway, regardless whether this happened or not, it's not something that any child should be thinking about, having a grandfather that potentially abused their mother. So despite his mother's absence during his early years, Arkwright and Zoe, they did later reconnect, but their relationship remained volatile. I did see a comment that his mother actually made saying that sometimes he would be completely normal and then he would kind of go into this dream world. It sounds potentially like some kind of disassociation going on. If that's the case, it could be linked to stress, to trauma, things like that, which the abandonment and the abuse in the family, that kind of thing, that could lead to all these sort of traumatic things going on for him. Of course, there could be biological, neurological reasons as well. So it might not necessarily be psychological at all. But if it is psychological, then you can kind of see in childhood here the symptoms of there being kind of psychological issues going on with him. Now, much of his childhood, as we know, was spent in care. He was bouncing about between institutions, growing angrier by the day. It's no surprise that as a child, he kind of spiraled into delinquency. His behaviours becoming increasingly erratic and confrontational. Academically, obviously, as well, he struggled. He was eventually expelled from school. And as he grew older, he was angry, he was resentful, and he descended into crime. And that was kind of inevitable, really. He was well known to the police, and he was frequently arrested for vandalism, burglary, theft, arson, all those things. As a teenager, his offences escalated. He terrorised an elderly man by breaking into his home and threatening him with a toy pistol. By his teens, he had already spent 30 months in Borstal, which is basically kind of like a youth detention centre. But even child psychologists, they kind of struggled to manage his behaviour. And this stint in the Borstal was then followed by 8 months in prison. But even prison didn't reform him, it just fed his violent tendencies. Now, whilst he was in prison, Arkwright became obsessed with serial killers, not just fascinated, but fixated. He spent hours poring over books in prison libraries, meticulously studying the lives and crimes of infamous murderers. People like Peter Sutcliffe and Jack the Ripper, who he absolutely idolised. Now, this fascination, it went kind of beyond curiosity. This was something that he was absorbing and something that he was internalising, and it was shaping the thoughts towards the methods that he was later going to employ in his own crimes. He obviously admired these killers' ability to evade capture as well, but the thing that he admired the most was their infamy. He would boast to other inmates, to friends, whoever, he would boast that one day he was going to be as notorious as these killers. I mean, I don't know what you think. I'm not sure that having books about serial killers in the prison library is that much of a good idea, but you know, I don't know. I don't blame things like movies and books and that kind of thing for people turning out and doing things. I know there are cases where people kind of copycat something, a movie, whatever. It happens, but it's rare. And I don't think that the movie or the book or the whatever is to blame for it. Personally, I think that whatever is in them is already there, and they're going to do it regardless of whether they read the book or watch the movie. It's going to happen. I don't know. I guess it's just like adding a slight bit of fuel to the fire, but that fire's already burning. So I'm not somebody that blames books or movies or whatever. However, I don't know. I'm not totally sure that there should be books about serial killers in the prison library. I don't know what you think, but I don't know. It just seems a bit strange. Anyway, so by the age of 21, Arkwright was living in a council flat on Denman Road in Wath. Now, he had not long been released from prison, obviously, and he kind of remained this petty criminal, a bit of a bully. He was notorious in the area. He had these violent outbursts, frequent disputes with neighbours, and his fixation with violence, it had reached disturbing levels. He saw himself as a bit of a survivalist. He kind of fantasized about joining the SAS, I believed, and he'd amassed like a collection of weapons. He stored them at his flat. The police did find these weapons at one point. Now, he built these hidden dens as well across the area, and he'd sit in these dens for hours, dressed in his military clothing, armed with a hunting knife, and he was basically lost in these sadistic fantasies of harming, of killing people that he despised. People like his grandfather, for instance, who he believed abused his mother and he thought was actually his father, and also was responsible for the years of bullying that he endured because of these rumours. And so he despised this man, and he fantasised about killing this man. Now, there were a couple of other people as well, a couple of neighbours that he also clashed with in the area. Two neighbours in particular. There was Marcus Law and there was Raymond Ford. Now, Marcus Law, he was a 25-year-old wheelchair user. He had been left paralysed by a motorcycle accident when he was 19 years old. And he lived in a specially adapted bungalow on Denman Road, the same road that Arkwright lived on. And basically, Arkwright, he harboured this growing resentment towards Marcus. He was predominantly irritated by Marcus's frequent requests for cigarettes, which seems really trivial, but it annoyed him. And by the end of August 1988, their tensions had escalated, boiling over because of his irritation that he thought Marcus was just constantly scrounging cigarettes from him. Crazy, right? But the small things, I guess. Now, the other neighbour was a man called Raymond Ford. He was 45 years old. He was a former teacher, and he lived in a flat about 40 yards away from Marcus Law's bungalow. Now, Raymond, he had spent time working overseas, teaching, I believe, but he had these declining health issues and they left him unable to work. And as a result, I mean, he's only 45, he became very, very depressed, and his life kind of just spiraled into deep depression, deep isolation. He ended up living in very, very squalid conditions. He drowned his misery in kind of cheap cider, and he rarely left his home except to buy alcohol and a newspaper. It was very, very squalid, the conditions he was living in. Looking at his flat, it looked to me like he was a little bit of a hoarder. I don't know, it's not mentioned, but that's just something I've assumed. Either way, he wasn't very well, he was very depressed, and Arkwright kind of made him feel even worse because Arkwright tormented this man. He would smash his windows, he would put dog poo through his letterbox. Nice. And eventually, he even broke into Arkwright's flat and, burglarised him. He stole an antique clock and a microwave, I believe. I don't know, bits and bobs. Now, Raymond knew damn well that it was Arkwright, and he reported this burglary to the police. And he named Arkwright as the culprit. But in doing so, basically, he had unknowingly signed his own death warrant. Now, unfortunately, Arkwright, he is fantasizing about the violence that he's going to do to the people he resents, to his grandfather, to Marcus Law, to Raymond Ford. And unfortunately, he had time to do that because he lost his job. Now, his employment history had always been a bit of a mess. It was defined by kind of these short-lived stints in low-paid, menial work. He basically had this volatile personality. He had poor attendance, aggressive behaviour. You know, his punctuation wasn't very good. All these things that make you virtually unemployable. So he kind of never really held a job for long, and he was relying on petty crime and benefits to kind of get by. But his last job, he lost it again. Now, this last job that he had was at a scrapyard in Mexborough, and he was working night shifts constructing railway tracks. And on Friday, the 26th of August, 1988, he was actually dismissed from this job for poor attendance, bad attitude, all those things. And it was just hours after losing this job that all that pent up frustration, that pent up anger, it all surfaced. He'd been fantasizing about this in his dens, dressed up in his military gear with his weapons and whatnot. It all just bubbled to the surface, and he carried out a 56-hour killing spree. It was a brutal rampage that cemented his legacy as one of Britain's most sadistic murderers. So, the afternoon of Friday, the 26th of August 1988, he was freshly dismissed from his job. He collected his final paycheck and he embarked on a drunken pub crawl through Mexborough. He was drowning his fury in alcohol. He was bitter, he was resentful, and absolutely drenched in anger. And so by 4:15 that afternoon, he was already intoxicated. He was brimming with rage. He was annoyed at his neighbours, annoyed about the impending arrest for burglary, because of Raymond Ford. He was annoyed about the whispers about his mother's supposed incestuous relationship, not a relationship, it's abuse, but relationship with his grandfather. These were all things that consumed him. And for years, he fantasized about becoming as infamous as Jack the Ripper. And within hours, he would be acting on those dark ambitions. So he leaves the pub, he's drunk, he's angry, all those things. So his first target was his 68-year-old grandfather, Stasys Puidokis. He had moved to England in the 1950s from Lithuania. Now, as we know, he's got this belief that Stasys might actually be his biological father. Basically, the police, from what I've read, they couldn't find any truth in the rumours. What I actually think is that he was not Arkwright's biological father. His father was his father, it wasn't his grandfather. But either way, it's all kind of psychologically impacted him, right? So Arkwright, he went looking for his grandfather at his home on Ruskin Drive in Mexborough, but the house was empty. So Arkwright then headed for his grandfather's allotment because he knew that his grandfather spent a lot of time at the allotment. He loved spending time at his allotment. And there he did find his grandfather. His grandfather was peacefully, attending to his vegetables on his allotment. He looked up, turned to greet his grandson, and then, without warning, Arkwright attacked his grandfather. He drove a knife into his grandfather's neck with such force that it severed his spinal cord and it left him paralysed. Arkwright then dragged his grandfather's helpless body into his shed. He bound and he gagged his grandfather, and then he grabbed one of his grandfather's axes because obviously in this shed his grandfather has an array of tools, and so he grabbed an axe and he embedded it into his grandfather's chest. He then grabbed a heavy lump hammer, and he basically then delivered the final brutal blows, and he shattered his grandfather's skull. Then he leaves. He just leaves his grandfather lying in this shed. He locks the door and he walks away. But he's not done. He's exhilarated from what he's just done. He's not exhausted from what he's done. He's exhilarated, and he wasn't finished. Now, as we know, he has lost his job. He needs money. And so obviously with his grandfather dead, he's thinking, oh, my grandfather's got money. I believe his grandfather had about £3,000 in life savings. So Arkwright went back to his grandfather's house to basically rob him. So he's murdered him, and he's now going to go back to the house and rob him as well. So he goes back to his grandfather's house, and unfortunately, his 72-year-old housekeeper, Elsa Conradite, she was at the property ironing in the kitchen. Now, again, the newspaper articles at the time, they mainly call her the housekeeper, but I've also seen sources that they lived together for 24 years. They had 2 Yorkshire Terriers together. So it sounds more to me than just a housekeeper, but I'm guessing she was kind of like a partner and a carer at the same time, possibly. I'm not too sure. But either way, she's there. She's ironing in the kitchen. And Arkwright is obviously expecting the house to be empty, and he just wants to rob the house. Instead of leaving, instead of walking away, because he's got no grudges with this woman. You know, she hasn't done anything to harm him or annoy him or anything. You know, she's not somebody that he's been sat in his den fantasizing about killing. So you'd think he would just kind of walk away and think, I'll come back to the house later. But he doesn't. Instead of leaving, he allegedly attacked Elsa, smashing her skull with an axe. Unfortunately, I have to say allegedly, because even though it's damn right obvious that he did do it, it was never proven in court. And it's tragic, absolutely tragic, because she never got that justice. It was never proven. And even more tragic is the fact that, you know, she was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. She was just in the way. You know, he just wanted to rob the place. So obviously he ransacks the house, he stole valuables, he stole the cash, he stole a pocket watch, which I think pops up again later and is able to tie him to the crime. So he's basically violating them even more after death. He's killed them both, and he's violating them as well by stealing their belongings. When the police later discovered Elsa's body, one of her little Yorkshire Terriers was shivering in distress by her body. Now, luckily, this little dog was unharmed, but he just didn't care. He just didn't care. Now, once again, he heads for the bars. He likes going on, you know, bar crawls, pub crawls, and that's where he spent the rest of the evening. Now, this is the Friday, so he's lost his job and then spent the afternoon murdering 2 people. It's the evening, he's now drinking even more. I mean, he was already intoxicated before that, so he's drinking again. His behaviour is getting even more erratic with every drink. He was picking fights, he was provoking people, but basically he seemed to be thriving on the chaos. People who saw him out that night said that he was sort of exhilarated. And these were people that he knew, they were his friends and neighbours of his grandfather, and he was out mingling with these people. But he wasn't hiding the crimes, he was revelling in them. He was dropping chilling hints to whoever would listen to him. For instance, one barman remembers him saying, "It's been murder on the allotment today." He's literally telling people, but people are just going to be laughing it off because you're not going to believe that, are you? Another person recalls him saying, "I'll see you in 25 years. I've just done 2 murders." He's literally telling people. There was no remorse. It was just pure satisfaction coming from him over what he had done. He was relishing in this shock that he was inspiring in people. He was drunk on alcohol, but he was drunk on the notoriety as well. Now, later that night, his violent urges, they were still festering away. And he even told another neighbour that he was going to murder Marcus. He told somebody he was going to murder Marcus. So at 3 a.m, so it's now kind of Saturday morning, Arkwright stumbled home, but he wasn't finished. I mean, he's really, really, really peeved at Raymond. Raymond has dobbed him for this burglary. He is angry as hell, and he wasn't going to let that go. So Raymond obviously was going to be his next victim. So in the early hours, it's like 3-4 o'clock, early hours of Saturday, the 27th of August, he entered Raymond's flat through a broken window. Now, this was a window that he had himself smashed because, you know, earlier I said that he was terrorising Raymond. This was a window that he had thrown a dustbin through. So he climbed through this window. He stripped down to his underpants. Now, some sources say he was completely starkers. Other sources say he was just wearing his underpants. Either way, pretty weird. But he did this apparently to not leave forensic evidence. Obviously, he's been studying these books, so he wants to not leave evidence because he wants to be infamous, get away with the murders like his heroes did. But then he puts on a very, very surreal devil mask. He puts on a bloody mask. So there he is. He's either starkers or in his underpants, wearing a mask, creeping through Raymond's flat in the middle of the night, early hours of the morning, like 3-4 o'clock, whatever time it is. And he finds poor Raymond slumped in his armchair. Now, as we know, Raymond, he's a bit of an alcoholic, he's depressed, he's literally slumped in his armchair. He's surrounded by cider bottles and whatnot. But you can imagine if he wakes up in that moment, what he is going to see. He is going to see Arkwright, where he's not even going to know. He's just going to see this horrific figure with like either no clothes on or very little clothes on, just stood there with this devil mask. It's just theatrics, isn't it? It's just absolute theatrics, but absolutely bloody terrifying for Raymond. And Arkwright, he stabbed Raymond between 250 and 500 times. The exact numbers aren't said, but whether it's 250 or 500, it's a lot of bloody times. He was stabbing so much that he even broke one of the knives in the process. This didn't kind of undeter him though. He just went and got another blade and he continued his assault on poor Raymond. Poor Raymond, he is being stabbed, literally hacked to death by some weird monster looking guy in a mask. Now, in some reports I've seen, he had actually terrorised Raymond beforehand with this devil mask. So I think it's kind of symbolic. I don't know, but I believe Raymond would have known that it was him. Arkwright wasn't putting this mask on to conceal his identity. That's not what it was about. He relished in the fact that people knew who he was. I think it was just more about putting on this show. Either way, poor Raymond's final moments of seeing that and absolutely brutal, terrifying. Arkwright wasn't done though. He wasn't done there. He wanted to imitate his idol, Jack the Ripper. So he next proceeded to gut and disembowel Raymond. He scattered Raymond's organs around the flat. He arranged them around the room like these macabre decorations. It's literally about putting on this performance, putting on this show for people to walk into. So the poor officers walking in to that flat, they walked in and they were literally stepping over entrails, you know. One of the officers later, one of the detectives later actually said it was one of the most brutal acts of slaughter they had ever seen. And he said it was even more chilling when you realise how he must have spent at least half an hour inflicting those wounds. And this wasn't quick. It was an indulgent killing. It was definitely premeditated. It wasn't a frenzied assault done in the spur of the moment. He had thought about it. It was methodical. It was calculated. It was thought out. And it was all about control. He wanted to indulge in the suffering that he was creating. He kind of reveled in that power. He reveled in that control that the violence gave him. And it was all about revenge. Ultimately, he was the one getting the last laugh because he wasn't going to let Raymond get the last laugh by getting Arkwright into trouble for the burglary. He was getting the last laugh, what he did. And so, yeah, so he then goes home. He showers off the blood and he goes to bed. Now it's like 4 o'clock in the morning, whatever, it's the early hours of Saturday morning. Now, literally just hours after he had gone to bed, I think it's about 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning, there's banging on his front door. And basically the police are banging on Arkwright's front door just hours after he's hacked poor Raymond to death. The police are banging on his door to arrest him. But they're not there to arrest him for the murders, because he's carried out 3 murders by this point. 3, his grandfather, the housekeeper, and now Raymond Ford. He's carried out 3 murders. And the police aren't there to arrest him for those. They're there to arrest him for the burglary of Raymond Ford's flat. The police were completely unaware of the absolute carnage that was lying nearby. They hadn't discovered the grandfather, they hadn't discovered Elsa, and they hadn't discovered Raymond Ford. They had no idea. So Arkwright is arrested, he's taken to the station, and he's basically released on bail. He's released on bail and ordered to appear in court the following week. You imagine, when the police find out later, knowing this, they'll be like, oh my actual God, we released this man who had just committed 3 murders. We released him back on the streets. They literally released a madman back onto the streets. So Arkwright's loving it. He's getting away with it. He's released. And so he spends that Saturday evening back in the bars, pubs, whatever, drinking heavily. Of course he did. Intoxicated again, he's ready for his final kill. Obviously, he doesn't know it's going to be his final kill, and I'm sure given the chance, it wouldn't have been his final kill. Luckily, it is his final kill. So, the early hours of August the 28th, so just 24 hours after brutally murdering Raymond Ford, he turns his attention to his other neighbour who he detests, Marcus Law, because darn Marcus Law scrounging those cigarettes from him, he deserves to be horribly murdered. He breaks into Marcus Law's specially adapted bungalow. Now, don't forget, he is in a wheelchair, so he is going to be completely defenceless, and he was defenceless when Arkwright broke in and began stabbing him. He stabbed him more than 70 times. More than 70 times. Notice how he's picking on people that are vulnerable, though. We've got 2 elderly people. We've got Raymond Ford, who is going to be depressed and unwell, not going to be able to defend himself. We've got Marcus now, who is in a wheelchair. To me, that just makes Arkwright nothing more than a coward. He's literally picking on people that can't defend themselves. And he's a tall man as well. He is like over 6 foot. So it's going to be difficult for these people to defend themselves against him. And so, like I say, he's just a coward, an absolute coward. Anyway, he's not content. Of course he's not content with stabbing Marcus 70 times. He, again, like his hero, Jack the Ripper, he attempts to disembowel him. He's not any good at it, though. He doesn't have any medical knowledge. He failed at school. He doesn't have anything. And so he's trying to disembowel Marcus, like his idol, like Ripper, and he's just crap at it. And he was getting frustrated. And in this frustration, he rammed one of Marcus's crutches through the gaping wound that he had made in his stomach now, because obviously he's made this big wound trying to disembowel him, whatever. And he gets annoyed and he just literally rams this crutch into Marcus's stomach. This poor man. But he wasn't finished, because he had to make a statement. He needed something kind of showy for people to find. And he was annoyed about these cigarettes. So what does he do? He gouges out Marcus's eyes. Oh God, just the thought. I hate the thought of the eyes being gouged out. It's awful. He gouged out Marcus's eyes and he stuffed cigarettes into Marcus's empty eye sockets because he wanted to make this statement. It was all about these bloody cigarettes. It was ridiculous. So he stuffs cigarettes into Marcus's eye socket. And he also stuffs them into his nostrils, his ears, his mouth. Poor Marcus, he's just lying there. He's got this crutch sticking out of him. And in his head, he's literally just got cigarettes poking out of him. It was quite a sight, and officers who found him would actually later describe his corpse as resembling a grotesque birthday cake. That's just horrendous, you know, just imagine the cake and the candles. It's like his face with the cigarettes coming out. It just, he was making a statement. It wasn't just murder. It was a deliberate statement that, again, he was the one in control and he could do what he wanted. So the next morning, no one's obviously got any idea that Arkwright has carried out these murders. He is a man that's desperate for notoriety. He wants people to find his work. Not necessarily know it was him, because he admires his idols who got away with their crimes. He doesn't want to necessarily go to prison for them. He doesn't want to be punished, but he wants people to admire what he's done. He wants people talking about him. Whether they say his name or not, he's going to know it's about him. And he crossed paths with Marcus's mother, Peggy. And he says to her, "Sorry about poor old Marcus. He's killed himself." What an absolute bloody idiot, because he's just implicated himself. Absolutely stupid. You know, I keep saying about how stupid these people are. I mean, seriously, he's literally just admitted it, because poor old Peggy, she goes running to her son's house, absolutely horrified, discovers Marcus's body. I mean, Jesus Christ, no mother should ever discover their child like that. Absolutely disgusting, absolutely vile. Apparently he had this smirk on his face when he said it. I mean, what an absolute disgusting, disgusting human being. So obviously he has implicated himself. So it didn't take long for the police to put things together and catch up to him. And so he is arrested for Marcus Law's murder. Now, don't forget, they've got him for Marcus Law, but they have no idea still about Raymond Ford, about the grandfather, about Elsa. They have no idea about these other bodies. They are just arresting him for the one murder. Of course, he vehemently kind of denies everything. He's just admitted it, but hey. Now, again, it's all about the show, and he was reveling in being interviewed and questioned and being the focus of attention. He reveled in that. And he had complete disregard for the trouble that he was in, just enjoying that attention that he was getting. And you'd kind of expect a killer who's kind of just been caught to be absolutely terrified, to be showing some fear and some desperation, perhaps even a little bit of regret. But no, Arkwright, he was enjoying every moment of the attention. He was arrogant, he was mocking, he was calm, he was horrible. Now, obviously, the police are trying to piece everything together. You know, there's not much forensic evidence at the moment. They knew that he was due in court for the burglary of Raymond Ford. So as part of their inquiries, just to kind of, you know, have a little chat to Raymond and see if he knew anything about this man that had burglarized him, they went to his house and knocked on his door, have a little chat with him. Obviously, Raymond fails to answer. Now, the police could hear the TV was on in the house. They could also see the broken window. These are things that you would expect to be glaring red flags. However, they knocked on the door. It was like, no one's in. I'm buggered off. What the actual? It's like, what more bloody warning signs do you need? I mean, to be fair, you know, hindsight and all that. And to be fair, I don't know anything about the area, but from the gist that I get, it's a bit of a rundown area. Standard of living might not have been that high. And so broken windows and that kind of thing might have been a kind of regularish thing. I guess if they were used to kind of seeing broken windows and mess everywhere, they might think nothing of it and leave. But still, it kind of, in hindsight, knowing what we know and knowing that Raymond's body is inside that house, it does kind of beg a disbelief, right? And it took another 2 days for them to go back. This time they climbed through the broken window, and as you can imagine, the absolute horror scene that they stepped into, the hallway, the corridor, whatever, it was strewn with cider bottles, whatever rubbish, just strewn about all over the place. Signs of Raymond's deep depression, basically, and his kind of deteriorating mental state. But amongst this disorder, his insides are kind of thrown about. They're stepping over his entrails, you know. They also find the devil mask as well, lying about on the floor. I mean, considering he wanted to leave no DNA evidence, it's a bit odd that he just left the mask there, which I'm assuming is going to have his sweat and hair possibly on it. I don't know. Anyway, he just left it there. But the absolute horror, that grotesque display of violence that Arkwright had left for the police to find, is absolutely disgusting. It was really, really harrowing to even the most seasoned investigators. They really struggled to process what they witnessed when they walked into that house. Blood spattered walls. The central heating was on as well, so the flat was sweltering hot, so you can imagine the absolute stench in that flat. It's horrendous. They walk through, they reach the bedroom, and they find that it looks like a pile of clothes in the corner of the room, but they realise that his body is underneath this pile of clothes. And he's not just been murdered, he's been absolutely butchered. He'd been systematically dismembered. It was pure sadism. So, officers return to question Arkwright. Obviously, Arkwright knows he's there for the murder of Marcus Law. Arkwright has no idea that the officers have just discovered Raymond's body. He doesn't know that yet. And bizarrely, because he doesn't know that they've discovered this second body, him being this little showy git, he shuffles this deck of playing cards and he claims to be psychic. And he pulls out one of the playing cards. He pulls out the 4 of Hearts, and he chillingly declares, "This is the Master card. It means you have 4 bodies and a madman on the loose. You found one of these, but there are 3 more. I can see Marcus Law, but the others are indescribable. They are just too horrible to describe." What an absolute, seriously, it's like something from theatre. You can imagine him just being all like, "This is the Master card," you know, just being horrendous. So he said in what he said there are 3 more bodies, not realising that they've just found Raymond. But still, officers, they kind of stiffen because they're like, "Hang on, did you just say there are 4 bodies?" The officers are like, "We've got 2. You just said there's 4. So obviously they're scrambling then, trying to find out where these other 2 bodies are. They have no idea. Absolutely no idea. But all they know is that there's now 2 more bodies to be uncovered. So off they go to search for more bodies. They go around to his grandfather's house, again, to question him. Bit of innocent questioning, you know. "Do you know anything about your grandson's movements?" kind of thing. And upon entry into this house, they find Elsa Conradite, the 72-year-old housekeeper. She had been brutally bludgeoned with this axe in the kitchen, and they found her little dog lying by her side, like I say, unharmed, thankfully. They obviously ask around, ask questions, and neighbours point them in the direction of the grandfather's allotment. They head there, and there they found the body of Stasys. He was lying in the shed, butchered. Now, you know I said they had 2 little dogs? That second Yorkshire Terrier was also found. So this poor little dog had been trapped in the shed with the grandfather's dead body for, it was good 2-3 days, whatever, before they found him. So this poor little dog had been trapped in this shed as well. I believe the dogs were eventually kind of rehomed with other family members, or I'm not too sure, but they were fine. So that's good. But absolute carnage that these officers saw. And here was Arkwright just literally playing games at the police station. It was just all a performance. And this performance, it wasn't over yet. So all 4 bodies have been discovered, and you would think at this stage he might be kind of, pissing himself a little bit, a few cracks might be appearing here and there, but no, he was composed, no cracks under pressure or anything like that. This was his moment to shine, it was his moment of infamy, his chance to cement his place as the notorious killer that he wanted to be. Now, there's no more bodies to find, obviously, because the police have all 4 bodies. And because he's so kind of, he's so embroiled in this game of this attention that he's getting, he fabricates a 5th victim. He fabricates another victim because he's enjoying this attention. He wants the police to be all eyes on him. And basically, it sends the police out doing more searches of the local area. They're searching waterways and abandoned buildings and whatever. An absolute, complete and utter waste of police time, of police resources. But Arkwright didn't give a damn. He just wanted that attention. He didn't want the attention he was getting to end. So he was making up bodies now. As we know, luckily, there weren't any more. So thank God it was just an empty taunt. But, that said, if he hadn't been caught when he had been, he would have murdered again, for sure. He was enjoying what he was doing. And he was actually planning on killing more people. And his mother and his cousin, I believe, were also on his list of victims. So he wouldn't have stopped. But regardless, he was still toying with the detectives. He was still kind of making them work for the information. At one point, he hummed a tune and made the officer kind of identify the song that he was humming. The officer kind of said, "Yeah, that's Strangers in the Night," and Arkwright told him that he got it right and that he was now prepared to cooperate. It was just ridiculous games, It is about control as well, because he's manipulating the officers into doing what he wants. So he feels like he's controlling the situation, even though he's the one that's arrested and he's the one being questioned. He's still controlling the situation because he's giving the information under his terms. So after days of interrogation, Arkwright, he finally confessed to 3 murders: Stasys Puidokis, Raymond Ford, and Marcus Law. However, even though he admitted to standing over Elsa Conradite's body with an axe in his hand, he said he did that, he still denied murdering her. He never confessed to killing her, which is really, really random. And unfortunately, there wasn't enough evidence to prove that it was him, which is really tragic. So anyway, he's charged with murder. I mean, at least they've got him for the 3. And he's remanded in HMP Hull whilst awaiting trial. And even behind bars, he was still kind of craving this attention. He smeared poop, he smeared feces all over the walls, demanding this recognition as a notorious killer. When he didn't feel like the police were giving him any more attention because he was stuck behind bars, he was smearing feces on the walls, which is absolutely gross. I think that was a thing though back this would have been what, the 80s, 89, 88, 89, 88, something like that. I actually visited a prison in the 90s as part of my degree, and the first thing they warned us about back then was actually to watch out because the prisoners would throw poop through the bars at you. I don't hear about that anymore. I don't know whether that was just a thing then, whether that was a British thing. I have no idea, but it was definitely a thing then anyway, because like I say, we were warned about it when we went to this prison. I wasn't in prison, like I say, it was for my degree. But yeah, really random. quite gross. But I'm guessing that prisoners they don't really have access to very much to kind of be disgusting about. So that's kind of what they do. But ugh, gross either way. So he's transferred to Rampton Hospital in Nottinghamshire, and he was closely monitored by psychiatrists there. Later on during his trial, Mr. Justice Boreham, he actually revealed that there were 3 esteemed psychiatrists that had actually assessed Arkwright, and each of these psychiatrists concluded that he posed a significant and lasting threat to the public. However, despite all the extensive evaluations, he was not diagnosed with a psychotic disorder. Instead, they basically branded him an evil fantasist. So he wasn't mentally ill in the clinical sense, but he was just consumed by this pathological hunger for notoriety. And very often it's touted that him losing his job at the scrapyard was kind of the catalyst for what happened. It kind of triggered this spree. But, ultimately his behaviour before then, it displayed clear signs of personality disturbance. There wasn't sort of insanity or anything going on. His theatrical boasts on night out, the grotesque staging of the crime scenes, his desire for infamy, all of that. This was a man. He was completely aware of his actions. He was just completely and utterly devoid of any morality or any remorse. He wasn't driven by delusions or psychosis, whilst there were clearly some kind of psychological issues there. That wasn't, he knew what he was doing. He killed because he wanted the attention, he wanted the recognition, and he wanted this twisted legacy. He knew what he was doing, and in the end it didn't work, did it? Anthony who? It's quite funny, actually, because the psychiatrist that evaluated him, they actually declared him the sanest person in the building. And the reason it's hilarious, because this is a place that's housed people like Ian Huntley, the Soham murderers, Beverly Allett, who was the angel of death, Peter Bryan, who was a cannibal killer, Charles Bronson, and here was Anthony Arkwright, the sanest person in the building. So obviously, ultimately, he was declared fully fit to stand trial. I mean, to be fair, sanity, if you're sane, it just means that you know right from wrong, which he does. It doesn't mean, however, that he's not mad as a bloody box of frogs and sadistic, which he also was. Very, very sadistic and a little bit mad, but completely sane. He knew what he was doing. So obviously going into the pre-trial, into the trial, all the legal proceedings, whatever, it was again all opportunities for him to be all Mr. Look at me, Outside the courtroom, he revelled in the spotlight. He was smirking at the cameras. He was mocking the bystander. They were like angry crowds outside, hurling abuse at him and demanding that he be hanged for what he did. These people were pissed off at him, and he's there just smirking away and mocking them and whatever. It was just all absolute entertainment. He even turned up wearing kind of, I don't know, cut-off jeans and a dinner jacket and a red bow tie, that kind of thing. It was all just arrogance. And, ultimately, who gives a crap what anybody wears? People can be punks, people can be goths, people can do whatever they want, dress however they want. That's the beauty of life, that we're all different. And there's no issue there. But I think there was an issue of respect going on. And so people found it disrespectful. He's just murdered 4 people, and people found it very, very insulting that he didn't show any respect at all. So on July the 13th, 1989, Anthony Arkwright stood before Sheffield Crown Court. He initially pleaded not guilty to 4 counts of murder. However, he later changed that plea to guilty for 3. of the killings, continuing to deny the murder of Elsa Conradite. With insufficient evidence to proceed regarding Elsa, Justice Borum, he ordered the charge to lie on file. And basically what that meant was that it would remain unresolved, but it could be reopened if new evidence ever emerged. I mean, it seems completely bizarre to me. He's admitted to standing over her with an axe. In the interview, he said that when he did the bizarre pulling out the card thing, he said there's 4 bodies. I mean, I don't know how much evidence they need, but I'm guessing forensically there just wasn't enough forensic evidence to tie him to the murder. So, they couldn't do him for it. At least it's lying on file, but it's just such a shame for the family. It's just such a shame when that happens. I don't know why he didn't confess. There's a cynical part of me that kind of wonders if he didn't do it because he would always have that leverage. It would be something that he could kind of use again later if he wanted to enter that limelight again, if the mood took him. There's also a little bit of me actually that wonders, but I don't know. I kind of wonder because she happened to be the one that he didn't intend to kill. And I wonder if maybe a little part of him is kind of, if he doesn't admit to that one, it's almost like it didn't happen. So he doesn't have to think about that one because there's no reasoning for him in his mind. He can't justify what he's done. I kind of wonder if there's that, but I don't know if I'm giving him too much credit there. There is actually a reason why I wonder that though. I mean, I know it's kind of maybe giving him a little bit too much credit, but around the same time as he carried out the murders, he did actually approach another man at a bus stop and ask him for a cigarette. Now, this man actually gave him a cigarette, but if the man hadn't given him a cigarette, then Arkwright was going to kill him. Now, this suggests to me that he does need to feel kind of personally aggrieved by somebody to carry out the murders, which is kind of why I kind of wonder a little bit if there is a little bit with Elsa of if he doesn't admit it, then it's almost like it didn't happen because he can't justify it to himself. But I don't know. Like I say, I'm probably giving him too much credit where it's really not due. The man is vile. Either way, that poor family, they never got absolute justice. I mean, it's tragic, absolutely tragic. So obviously during the trial, the defence, they tried to argue that Arkwright was mentally unstable, that he had this troubled upbringing and that was a contributing factor. This obviously was an assessment that Arkwright wholeheartedly agreed with, and he gave a rambling, disjointed 15-minute speech attempting to justify his actions. He basically blamed his mental state on a disturbed childhood. I mean, yeah, he was disturbed, but, lots of people have disturbed childhoods and they don't kill people. But he actually ended with the words, "We were born to live in a world of love." All right, then. It's just him being all theatrical again. He's just blaming the lack of love that he got growing up on his actions. He is self-obsessed. This wasn't a statement about the world in general. It sounds kind of very generic. We're born to live in a world of love. It sounds like a generic statement. But I think this is a statement, it's not so much about the world in general, but it's about his perceived suffering. It's about him. It's sort of, instead of offering this remorse for what he's done, he's excusing his crimes and he's placing the blame elsewhere and blaming the fact that he wasn't loved enough growing up. And that's what he did. That's the way I see it anyway. Either way, it's, a little bit ambiguous, but I think that's what he wants, isn't it? He just, he wants people to ponder over him. Ultimately, it wasn't an apology though, no apology, nothing. He showed no remorse. To this day, there's no kind of explanation for what he did really. Just self-indulgent theatrics. So anyway, in the end, the court remained unmoved by his crap. Of course they did. They could see through that shit. So basically, because he pled guilty, there wasn't really a trial. So they moved very, very swiftly to the sentencing, and he was sentenced to life imprisonment with a recommended minimum term of 25 years. Now, 25 years in 1989, 89, 99, 09, 10, 11, 12. So theoretically, 12, 13, 14, 15, he could be walking the streets. Hang on, my maths is rubbish. 89. I don't know, 2013 approximately, he could have been walking the streets, which is a scary, scary thought. However, a year later, a year after he was given this 25 years, so in 1990, the then Home Secretary, Jack Straw, he intervened. And he basically viewed the original sentence, this 25 years, as dangerously lenient. Hell yeah. Because like I say, he could have been walking free like 10 years ago. Imagine that. And so he upgraded Arkwright's punishment to a whole life tariff. Like I said at the beginning, this is a sentence that is reserved for Britain's most dangerous criminals. And this meant that he was never going to be eligible for parole. He was never going to be released, ever. We are talking the scum of the scum. We are talking whole life tariffs are only given to people like multiple murderers, terrorists. There's around about 70, I believe, serving whole lives at the moment. Among them are notorious criminals, including Rose West, Lucy Letby, you know, that she was the nurse that was convicted of killing multiple babies. John Maiden, who I did actually discuss in another case. He murdered his 12-year-old niece, Tia Rigg. These are really, really nasty people. And Arkwright is among these people. And it wasn't a light sentence because, don't forget, he was just 21 when he committed his murders. He was 22 when he was convicted. And so basically he's one of the youngest ever to be given this sentence. And it's quite a shocking move because, you know, a lot of young offenders, they are considered capable of rehabilitation. They are at least given a chance to rehabilitate. But Arkwright's crimes, they were just too calculated, too devoid of remorse. He was just deemed to be too evil to be given a second chance. And the authorities ruled that in the end, he was going to die behind bars because he could have been walking free in 2013, which is an absolutely terrifying thought. There would be more people dead if he was. He was so desperate for the attention and so desperate for people to know who he was. And I don't think that would have changed. Even with therapy and all that, I don't think that would have changed at all. I think he was extremely dangerous. And so ultimately, he has been reduced to nothing more than a footnote, a footnote in British criminal history. So thank God for Jack Straw, eh? So like I said, despite Zoe's absence in Arkwright's early years, they did eventually reconnect, but their relationship, like I said, remained volatile. And, you know, I said that, you know, he most likely would have killed her. The reason I said this is because there was one incident where Zoe was at her father's house, Arkwright's grandfather's house, with her young daughter at the time. And basically, Arkwright turned up and threatened to kill the young daughter with a dagger, with a knife. He threatened a little child. Zoe obviously was angry as hell and ordered him to leave. And so he threatened to kill her. He you know, and I think afterwards, Zoe did make statements to the press saying that she believed that they would have been next. And I do think just with the whole revenge thing and how petty he was. I mean, for God's sake, he killed Marcus Law over cigarettes. That's how petty he was. It could be the tiniest of things that would annoy him. And he would just hold a grudge and hold a grudge. And it just, you know. So like I said, following the conviction, Zoe did actually come out later on and do some media interviews and try to kind of put the rumours to bed a little bit. And she did confirm that Stasys, her father, had abused her as a child. She said that the abuse began when she was 5 and that it escalated until he was jailed in 1960 for indecent assault. She did insist, however, that Dick Arkwright was Anthony Arkwright's father, not Stasys, not her father or Arkwright's grandfather. Interestingly, though, something she does says is that 2 months before he carries out the murders, apparently the police turned up at her door wanting to know about Arkwright's father, because apparently Arkwright had filed a police report claiming that Stasys was his father. This was a claim that she said left her feeling humiliated. I don't know if I'd feel humiliated or I'd be more concerned. I mean, if my child is thinking that, I'd be like rushing to my child and saying, this is what's happened. And, you know, I'd be more concerned about that. But then, I don't know, I guess if she was scared of Arkwright at the same time, I don't know. It's all a bit, I don't know, it's difficult. Without being there, it's difficult to kind of judge what people do. But really, really sadly, absolutely tragically, like I say so many times, the ripple effects of these things, they go on after the crimes. And this is just so tragic. Basically, 14 years after the murder of Marcus Law, his father, Tony Law, he took his own life. He was found in the garage of his home. He had basically poisoned himself with car exhaust fumes. He was obviously gutted over Marcus's death. But apparently, Marcus wasn't the only child he had lost. He had lost another son before Marcus. So Marcus's brother had taken his life in 1973 at 13 years old. 13 years old, this kid took his own life. He was dealing with his 13-year-old son's death. And then he had to endure Marcus's death, both violent, horrific deaths. And the weight of both of these tragedies, it was just impossible for this poor man to endure. And it was just another cruel consequence of Arkwright's actions, you know? Like I say, it's this brutal reminder that it extends beyond the victims directly. It extends so much, and it's just so sad. It's absolutely devastating for the people that are left behind by this violence, the absolute sorrow that these people go through. And the other thing that makes this story even worse is that Marcus himself, this poor guy, he was obviously grieving his brother's death, and then this awful, awful man goes on and murders him over some cigarettes. Crazy. So, thankfully, Arkwright remains incarcerated to this day, and he's got his whole life tariff and he's never getting out. Thank God. Don't know where he is. Some reports suggest he's at Shrewsbury Prison, but I don't know. His exact location is unconfirmed. But it doesn't really matter, does it? It really doesn't matter, because his dream of notoriety, it never materialised. He sought a lasting legacy, but he faded into obscurity. The only people that remember this man are the people he affected, the victims, the lives he destroyed. They're the only people that know his name. He imagined himself as Britain's most feared killer, as infamous as Jack the Ripper. But he's just another prisoner who's going to die in his cell, forgotten by everyone except for the families whose lives he absolutely devastated. You know, and it's because of this that it almost felt wrong covering this case, actually, because he wants the attention, he wants the notoriety. So even just sitting here talking about him, it kind of feels wrong because, you know, I don't want to give him that attention. But his victims do. They deserve remembering. So that's more important, you know. They are way more important than this man who sought infamy only to become nothing at all. Anthony who? What a shit case, eh? What a shit case. But important to cover, I think. Important. And, you know, I'm surprised there's not more people serving this whole life tariff, you know. But anyway, let me know what you think. As ever, take care of yourself. Hug them trees if you're feeling a bit deflated. Trust me, hug a tree. Hug your dogs. I've moved things around a little bit so that my dog can come and sit. I've got my chair here, which I usually sit in, so my dog can sit. He's old. He's like 11 now, and he stays by my side at all times. He doesn't like it when I film, because if I'm sitting in the chair, he can't sit next to me, so he gets a bit sad. So I've got him the option of sitting in my chair now. So you know, you look after yourselves and take good care, and I will see you back here, I hope, for another true crime case at my true criminal abode. Bye.